May I remind members leaving the chamber that social distancing measures are in place there and across the Holyrood campus. Please take care. The next item of business is debate on motion 22949 in the name of Jenny Gilruth on COVID-19, review of Scottish Government's approach to international development. May I ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons or press R if they're remote. And I call on Jenny Gilruth to speak to and move the motion for around 8 minutes, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. COVID has changed the world. Everyone, rich or poor, black or white, north or south, has felt its impact. We are still in the midst of that global pandemic, and whilst it has changed the job of governments on every continent, it has also changed how we go about our tasks in this place. Here in this chamber today, the change is immediately visible. We are socially distanced, and our visitor galleries are, hopefully only for now, closed temporarily. We are learning how to vote from elsewhere. We have not only had to pass emergency legislation, we are still, unfortunately, requiring our fellow citizens to restrict what they do, as we have just heard. Every bit of the Scottish Government's work has been affected by COVID, including in the vital work of international development. In that area, as in all, we are faced with a renewed and unexpected challenge. So, Presiding Officer, we must rise to the occasion, take heed and respond by refreshing our approach, intensifying our commitment and making sure we protect and indeed enhance Scotland's contribution to those most in need. This is a debate that I am privileged to lead, but it must be owned by all of us here today. Presiding Officer, it is 15 years since the then Labour Liberal Executive initiated the International Development Fund. That offer in 2005 was firmly rooted in the historic links between Scotland and Malawi. And since that time, Zambia, Rwanda and Pakistan have joined as our partner countries. I want to assure members at the outset of this debate that our current partner countries remain unchanged. This review is very much focused on the well-being of those partner countries. So as we reach a milestone of the 15th anniversary of our International Development Programme, we continue to be proud of the additional and unique contribution that Scotland makes. COVID-19 has understandably impacted on our programme over the last 6 months. We've tried to mitigate the effects on our project partners, including approving additional funding where we were able to do so. However, it is clear that COVID-19 will remain a global threat for some time. It is for this reason that, in relation to the programme, it felt right to pause and to reflect. This allows us to consider how to future-proof our programme. It also allows us to consider the impact of movements like Black Lives Matter in the context of international development. Earlier this year, I listened to my colleague Hamza Yousaf make one of the most powerful contributions in the chamber that I have ever heard. He spoke of the whiteness of Scotland's judicial system, outlining the dire need for progress for Scotland's Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. I left the chamber that day and I thought about the vast, overwhelming number of white faces I have met in person or virtually since taking up this office in February. Writing in this weekend's Scotsman, Susan Dalgetty rightly asks, what does Black Lives Matter, which emerged on the streets of America, mean to an African? And I've been asking that question for many months now in my meetings with the sector. Last week, I asked an academic who works in one of our partner countries. She said, Black Lives Matter in America is not the same as in Africa. But if you come to my country and you put a white person in charge of a programme, when I could do that job, when I know my local community, that's what Black Lives Matter means to me. That is white privilege. Presiding Officer, the problem of white gaze is clearly not one the Scottish international development sector has to solve on its own. It is a global challenge for all governments, but I do believe that we should try to set an example in Scotland. Lauren Reid's writing in the New Humanitarian back in June said, I want international development organisations to not just do good in other countries, but to do better for their own employees and their communities. And Lauren sets out some key tests for the sector, including implicit bias and systemic racism training for all staff. That's a step in the right direction, but she argues it shouldn't be a tick box exercise. Rather, it should reflect the embedded structural inequality that racism creates. The Malawi-Scotland Partnership and the Scotland-Malawi Partnership published a joint response to the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year. They said, we acknowledge and greatly regret that racism has been perpetrated in Scotland's 161-year relationship with Malawi, while also appreciating there are a great many examples of Scots and Malawians working together to fight prejudice. Scottish missionaries, particularly in the early 20th century, were by no means free from the prevailing racist assumptions of their day. Many Scots became deeply identified with the black community in Malawi, but Malawians were, quite rightly, alert to elements of paternalism and racism that they experienced, even in the best of them. A very powerful statement from two of our core-funded organisations, and one which I'm certainly intent that we learn from through this review. Refreshing our approach for the maximum benefit of our partner countries, of course, means looking at our whole programme. This means reviewing all the areas that we currently fund under the International Development Fund, which include our partner country programmes, our small grants programme, our core funding to networking organisations, and also to the development education centres. We will also consider any read across in this review from our Humanitarian Emergency Fund and Fair Trade in Scotland, both of which, along with the small grants programme, were very recently reviewed. If we are serious about truly tackling the charges of white gaze, about amplifying Global South voices, and if we are serious about partner-led development, if we're to build programme sustainability against that threat of COVID-19, then we need to be open and serious about change. I hope members will agree with that sentiment today. The draft principles of the review are key to both the review and to our future approach. Members will notice that the overarching ethos of international solidarity is embedded in the principles, and through those we have also reiterated our commitment to a human rights approach. I've mentioned our ongoing commitment to partner-led development, and on that point I've written to all 4 partner countries' governments, and I've held initial meetings with their representatives in Malawi and in Zambia. But I'm also keen to hear from civil society in our partner countries too. Again, this is important if we are to conduct the review and ensure a refreshed programme which is truly inclusive. I'll be speaking to our Malawian partners next week, and I look forward to similar roundtables with Rwanda and Zambia. In terms of engagement in Scotland, I'm equally keen to hear about views on the draft principles. I'm sure we'll hear some of them today. In recent weeks, I've attended the Malawi Cross-Party Group and the Alliance's annual conference to discuss the review. At the end of this month, I'll host a roundtable with the sector in Scotland, and tomorrow I'll attend one of the Alliance's quarterly meetings to discuss some of those principles in more depth. I also found the roundtable discussion that I held last week with international academics, including some from our partner countries, hugely useful in informing my thinking. Members will note this is not a strategic review of the same kind we had in 2016. And if this were October 2019, I'm sure that the approach we might have adopted would have been different. But we should all be cognizant of the new reality that COVID-19 presents. There is an urgency about our work, which would not have existed 6 months ago. That being said, I want to use today to listen to members and to reach consensus, as can be evidenced by the spirit of the motion from the government today. Presiding Officer, I am a white Scottish Government Minister serving in an almost completely white Parliament in a country where systemic racism prevents the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community from achieving their full potential. I come to this chamber from a position of privilege, which I recognise, but I can't turn the clock back. What I can do is to take responsibility by ensuring we refresh our international development offer in Scotland to take cognizance of that historical privilege, to work with our partner countries in developing solutions which tackle inequality. And I hope that I will have the support of the Chamber in doing so. Presiding Officer, I move the motion in my name. Thank you.
I now call on Alexander Stewart to speak to and move Amendment 22949.1 for around 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to be able to take part in today's debate on our approach to international development, and I move the amendment in my name. Since becoming elected to the Scottish Parliament, I have taken a keen interest in overseas aid and international development. And I'm sure that we can all agree that developing economies have a moral obligation to support these countries on their journey to development. We are very lucky in Scotland to have not one but 2 governments involved in international development, and we must salute what the Scottish Government do wholeheartedly along with the UK Government. And as I say, the efforts of both are much welcome. Scotland has a long-standing reputation for internationalism, but the links with our partner countries of Malawi, Zambia, Rwanda and Pakistan are particularly strong. We therefore welcome the Scottish Government's renewed commitment to international development, and especially its open stance when it's supporting partner countries. The ring-fencing of funding to support our partner nations' efforts to tackle COVID-19 would also seem to be a very sensible approach, Deputy Presiding Officer. It is right, however, that given the new challenges that the coronavirus presents to us all around the world, we review the approach to international development. As well as consisting and looking at COVID-19, it also is the impact of development and on international aid should be targeted. And where it should be most targeted is to where it is most and going to make the most difference, while ensuring that any assistance takes into account our climate change responsibilities. My colleagues and I look forward to engaging with the Scottish Government on the review to ensure that we make the best possible differences through a refreshed Scottish international policy. And I know from having spoken to the Minister on a number of occasions, we both wish for that to be achieved. I've also said in this chamber in the past, when I did hold my party's international development brief, that we must maximise the benefits of our international development efforts if we work together within and outside this chamber. That means working across party lines and working with partners in civil society, including community groups, businesses, schools, academia, the health sector, religious organisations, and many, many more. Deputy Presiding Officer, we have all of them in abundance, and we should ensure that we continue to support them. In my role as one of the co-conveners of the cross-party group on Malawi, I am particularly aware of the success that that has had in the approach of ensuring that does take place. With the cooperation and support of Scotland-Malawi Partnership, Scotland has over 1,200 links between Malawi and organisations and key individuals across Scotland. These partnerships through civic society have real benefits for people on the ground, not just in Malawi, but also in Scotland as well. The University of Edinburgh study a couple of years ago estimated that the link-ups collectively were over £49 million of resources and finance, which has benefited nearly over 3 million Malawians. This is a staggering achievement, and I want to put on record my thanks to everybody who has been involved in making that happen. It is my view that the continual partnership links between us are vitally important, and that should be an integral part of the Scottish Government's review, Deputy Presiding Officer. In the vein of collaboration, I think it's very important that we consider and acknowledge the efforts that have taken place from the UK Government to recognise what takes place. The UK is seen as a leader in international aid and continues to be the only G7 nation to hit the target of spending 0.7% gross national income on overseas development, a community, and that has been put into law by the government. And as part of the UK family of nations, Scotland can be rightly proud of the work that it has done to support the poorest and the most vulnerable around the world. UK aid and its nation flag of branding is recognised the world over and supports many projects and lifelines to ensure that emergency food, medical supplies in areas of sheer poverty and natural disaster and in conflict make a real difference. As of April 2019, UK aid directly supported an incredible 2.5 million individuals across 37 different countries. The total value of the support in the most vulnerable has been around 150 million in the last 5 years alone. The UK has been playing a major important part in the fight against the coronavirus. UK aid has already contributed £774 million to tackling the pandemic globally by protecting millions of people in the developing world in areas of also conflict. A few months ago, the UK government also hosted a global vaccine summit, which raised $8.8 billion to support health systems to withstand the impact of the coronavirus and the mainstream to ensure that the vaccine and the world is protected. And the UK continues with the Virus Alliance, one of the largest donors, pledging £330 million per year for the next 5 years. Next year, the UK will host G7 presidency, and that will give a huge opportunity for new international approaches on health, on security, and protecting the most vulnerable around the world, and securing and supporting the pandemic. Moreover, we know that we will bring the COP 2016 climate conference to Glasgow next year. Climate change is a serious problem for everyone around the world, which has affected the most poorest countries most significantly, and it's vital that we work collaboratively to ensure that we work together to ensure that that does take place. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, we in the Scottish Conservative Unionists are fully committed to ensuring that Scotland plays its part at tackling poverty and hardship internationally. We support investment in international development, both here in Scotland and within the UK. It is important that we recognise the benefits of both of these efforts delivered to improve lives in developing countries around the globe, and I hope that members across the Chamber will feel able to support this sentiment and back my amendment this evening. Thank you.
I now call Claire Baker to speak to and move Amendment 22949.2 for around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would first like to congratulate the Minister on her first front bench debate, although she's had to sit in the second row of seats. Scotland has an important role to play in international development, and it should be underpinned with strong principles. Scottish Labour is proud of our international development achievements, which includes setting up the partnership with Malawi and introducing the International Development Fund. The SNP government has built on this success, and there is broad support across the Parliament for our existing international development work and the aim of maximising our contribution to our international development partner countries. The purpose of the Labour amendment is to recognise the positives of our approach to date and highlight the importance of meaningful consultation as part of the government's review. And I'm pleased that the Scottish Government, I understand, are inclined to support it. In terms of the Conservative amendment, while a statutory spending commitment for international aid is welcome, we also should recognise that it doesn't go far enough, and percentage spend, even though it's a European recognised approach, is also can be vulnerable. Since 2005, the Scottish Government has set a clear commitment to funding international development work. Initially focusing on Malawi, we have seen this expanded over time, both in terms of work and in its budget. Just last weekend, the President of Malawi, Dr. Lazarus, I didn't know how to say it, Chakwera, addressed the Scotland-Malawi Partnership Conference, where he spoke passionately about the existing relationship between Scotland and Malawi and urged its further development, including by growing the number of civic links. We have a number of organisations doing valuable work in Scotland to promote international development, many of whom have contributed helpful briefings ahead of this debate. We should recognise the positive contributions they and others have made and are making. They, as are others, are working through the pandemic, and I thank them for their efforts. The programme for government set out the intention to review Scotland's approach to international development. That review is now underway and has an intended completion date of the end of the year. The time frame is short, and the framing of the review as a refresh isn't particularly convincing. It appears to be more than that, and as such the need for proper consultation, which includes engagement with those involved in delivering the current approach, is crucial. This process must involve meaningful consultation and engagement with the Parliament, including the relevant committee, with partner country governments and charities, and with those involved bodies both in Scotland and overseas. There are strong links between Scottish civic society and civic society in our partner countries. This is an important approach which should be retained, and we can benefit from their knowledge and expertise. There are good examples of partnership working and capacity building, and that shouldn't be lost. The key principles which underpin the review are not contentious and are indeed broadly supported across and beyond the sector. But questions remain over what the practical implications of how these principles are achieved and who's been consulted and involved in determining that. I've spoken already about the importance of meaningful and transparent consultation that encompasses organisations already active in partnership work, as well as new voices in Scotland and in our partnership countries. The principles also refer to the importance of future-proofing, with a specific focus on climate change and COVID. The ring-fencing of underspend this year in order to contribute to COVID-19 efforts in our partner countries is a positive, practical measure, and I welcome the views of partner countries will be heard in setting the related priorities. Future-proofing is something we should apply in all areas of policy and law, and this should not be done in a piecemeal fashion. The need to future-proof the international development programme in terms of climate change has to be done as part of wider steps to enhance policy coherence for sustainable development. And we need to see mechanisms to improve impact assessment, decision-making and scrutiny across all aspects of government and Parliament. The details on the process of the review also highlight concerns raised by the Black Lives Matter movement, including in terms of the need to address white privilege, an issue that the Minister talked about. We must recognise the importance of the Black Lives Matter movement and the need for action in all areas of our lives, including our roles as parliamentarians. This applies across all areas of policy. Within international development, there are complex challenges stemming from the power dynamics of colonisation, and it is important that institutions continue to scrutinise and improve the way they work. I know this is something our NGOs, charities and other organisations are taking seriously. This review of Scotland's approach to international development is a good opportunity to take stock, to reflect on what we have achieved in our partnerships and to look to how we improve what we do. In doing so, we need to continue to engage and to involve our partner countries and civic institutions in the process. We have an opportunity to set out an approach which builds on successful, long-standing relationships and to enhance our positive international contribution, and we should seek to do this in a transparent and cooperative way. I move the amendment in my name.
Now call on Liam MacArthur for around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. With all that's going on at the moment, can I thank the Minister for carving out time for Parliament to debate this issue today. Of course, as everywhere, COVID is making its presence felt in the area of international development, not least as the International Development Alliance warn by threatening to put back by a decade achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Meanwhile, Black Lives Matter has profoundly challenged us to look again at the inherent biases in the way our societies function. Again, this has a bearing on our approach to international development. So I understand entirely why the government wants to ensure its strategy remains relevant, effective and true to our collective aspirations. However, I would caution against making changes for change's sake. Scotland's international development budget at £10 million is relatively small. It's dwarfed by the UK budget, thanks in no small part to my Lib Dem colleagues Lynn Featherstone, Michael Moore and Jeremy Purvis for securing the 0.7% target in law. Sadly, I have to say that by abolishing DFID and by tying increasingly aid to trade, some of Alexander Stewart's colleagues are not doing much to help, I think, deliver the spirit, the genuinely held spirit of the amendment he's lodged today. Yet, over the last 2 decades, this is an area where Scotland has punched above its weight. There are many reasons for this, which are both interrelated but also highly relevant in the context of the review of the government's strategy. So what are those strengths? Well, firstly, we should acknowledge the strong cross-party support. This dates back to the First Lib Dem Labour coalition and especially the personal commitment shown by the then First Minister Jack McConnell. But it's continued uninterrupted over successive governments and over successive parliaments. Let's not underestimate the powerful message this sends, particularly at a time when there are plenty of siren voices encouraging us to pull up the bridges and look inward. In turn, though, this cross-party support draws its strength from the extent of civic buy-in from across Scotland. As a co-convener like Alexander Stewart of the Malawi CPG, I am shamelessly and proudly using the warm heart of Africa to illustrate this point. There's scarcely a community in Scotland that does not have some sort of link with Malawi through individuals, schools, churches, community groups, businesses and others. My own former school in Sandy is a perfect illustration. After winning a competition launched by Jack McConnell to coincide with the signing of the 2005 cooperation agreement, Sandy forged links with Minga, a school on the outskirts of Lilongwe. This is a relationship that has benefited both sides, Sandy and Minga, pupils, staff and the wider community. And again, this is a strength of Scotland's approach to international development. Certainly with regards to Malawi, it is two-way, it's based on mutual respect and mutual benefit. As the President of Malawi said at the weekend when addressing members of the Scotland-Malawi partnership, it is remarkable that in the midst of Scotland's fight against COVID-19, it has still been working side by side with us in our own fight here in Malawi. The impact of your support to us in raising funds and coordinating efforts has been far-reaching and inspiring. Thank you. I want to finish by highlighting that coordination effort referred to by President Chikwera. The Scottish-Malawi Partnership and its sister organisation in Malawi do tremendous work in identifying connections, making links and then facilitating and supporting relationship. This coordination is invaluable. It allows members to feel part of something bigger, more substantial and even more rewarding. It also allows Scotland to punch above its weight by levering in £200 for every pound spent. That is why the government's international strategy is worth more than £10 million, why we're able and should be more ambitious about what it can achieve, but also why we must take care to preserve and value what we have and avoid the temptation of change for change's sake. I echo Claire Baker's strong call for meaningful consultation, but also look forward to working with my friend Jenny Gilruth in delivering a strategy that can command cross-party support and of which this country can be rightly proud. Thank you.
We now move to the open debate and speeches of 4 minutes, please. I do have a wee bit of spare time if anybody wants to intervene, argue, whatever. And I call first of all Ruth Maguire, to be followed by Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the great importance the Scottish Government places in being a good global citizen. It's right that we play our part in tackling the global challenges of poverty, injustice and inequality. I commend the Scottish Government's overarching ethos of international solidarity in an interdependent world. And of course, the cross-party support for international development in the Scottish Parliament has been a key feature underpinning the Scottish Government's international development work since 2005, and long may that continue. At the forefront of the Scottish Government's efforts is the International Development Fund, along with the new Humanitarian Emergency Fund, which aims to support and empower Scotland's partner countries, Malawi, Rwanda, Zambia and Pakistan. All of the Scottish Government's international development work now contributes to sustainable development and the fight against poverty, injustice and inequality internationally within the framework of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These are the globally agreed priorities for tackling poverty and inequality in UN member states. Scotland was one of the first countries to commit publicly to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainable Development Goal 16 is to promote just, peaceful and inclusive societies. Conflict, insecurity, weak institutions and limited access to justice remain a great threat to sustainable development. The number of people fleeing war, persecution and conflict exceeded 70 million in 2018, the highest level recorded by the UN Refugee Agency in almost 70 years. In 2019, the United Nations tracked 357 killings and 13 forced disappearances of human rights defenders, journalists and trade unionists in 47 countries. The helpful briefing that MSPs received from SCIAF speaks to the importance of human rights defenders and acknowledges that around the world it's increasingly dangerous for citizens to defend their human rights. SCIAF commends Scotland's proud record of supporting human rights defenders and encourages the Scottish Government to continue this work, urging it to challenge the drivers of human rights violations and environmental damage. They commend the Scottish Government's Human Rights Defenders Fellowship, which provides much needed respite for human rights defenders, as well as learning and networking opportunities. It's clear that COVID-19 will remain a threat for some time to come, and it's right that the Scottish Government is reviewing its international development programme in light of the coronavirus pandemic. The review and open discussion on their approach to international development should ensure the Scottish Government is focusing its contribution on areas where it can make the biggest difference against this backdrop of the new reality of COVID-19. And should also ensure that as much Scottish Government funding as possible reaches the partner countries which need it most. The UN Secretary-General urged governments to be transparent, responsive and accountable in their COVID-19 response and ensure that any emergency measures are legal, proportionate, necessary and non-discriminatory, saying the best response is one that responds proportionately to immediate threats while protecting human rights and the law. And of course, human rights put people at the centre. Responses that are shaped by and respect human rights will result in better outcomes in beating the pandemic and ensuring healthcare for everyone and preserving human dignity. Sound guiding principles for all of us and as true domestically as they are internationally. Presiding Officer.
I call Maurice Corrie to be followed by Lewis MacDonald.
Deputy Presiding Officer, thank you. I'm very pleased today to take part in this debate and congratulate the Minister in bringing this debate to the Parliament. A very important debate. Along with my colleagues, I welcome every commitment to safeguard and promote international development and sincerely hope that the principles underpinning this review will be delivered in practice. Coronavirus has shown our need to be ready for any global challenge. It has pushed us to think beyond the short term and join a wider humanitarian-focused conversation, one which seeks to find the most adaptable and effective ways to contribute towards international development. And so, in light of the pandemic, coupled with the ongoing climate emergency, the Scottish Government's commitment to increase funds for our partner countries is indeed most welcome. Indeed, every investment which seeks to improve health and well-being, access to education and tackle global poverty is made even more impactful through fostering connections and sharing expertise. I'm also pleased to see that a UK-wide effort in overseas development. For example, since 2015, the UK government has committed to spending 0.7% of gross national income on overseas development every year, and moreover to assist with the ongoing Syrian conflict, which has been worsened by the COVID-19 challenge. The UK has pledged at least £300 million to support more vulnerable Syrians with food, healthcare, economic assistance and education. And efforts such as this are absolutely vital, especially under the increased pressures we have now witnessed on a global scale as a result of the pandemic. Scotland's international aid policy relies on the core value of partner-led and mutually beneficial partnerships. Indeed, this is when international development works at its best. We have seen that in practice through the fantastic work of the Scotland-Malawi partnership, as already mentioned earlier by speakers. An approach such as theirs has long left behind the unhelpful and frankly outdated mindset which viewed international development funding as an unequal balance of power involving donors and somehow lesser recipients. Today, we instead see how coordination delivery of funding has been greatly advanced by a clear emphasis on localization. For example, the current COVID restrictions on travel has shown the benefits of having locally partnered projects in place which have been able to continue their work to deliver funds in country and with only minor adjustments. And tier funds projects are a prime example of this. In these very partnerships, fostered through locally rooted civic communities that must be safeguarded and protected in government review. Previous consultations involving all stakeholders at national and local level have proved invaluable to informing a joined-up approach, and therefore I hope this review will in practice carefully strive to include all civic groups in the conversation and be as transparent as possible, for this is not to be the case. If this is not to be the case, would be a true disservice to the collaborative working relationship that have been successfully forged over time. And to conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, global interdependency has never been more pronounced than it is now. And this relies on one another, fostered through inclusive and collaborative efforts between governments, civic organisations, local communities must continue to inform Scotland's approach to international development. It is an ongoing dialogue that is essential in reducing inequality and maximising opportunity wherever possible, and I hope it will be actively encouraged and utilised by the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Corrie. I now call Lewis MacDonald to be followed by Alistair Allen.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. COVID-19 has been hugely challenging for all of us, but people in the Global South have faced challenge on a different scale. To stay safe, we are reminded to wash our hands more often and for longer. In the Global South, there are 3 billion people who have no access to hand washing at home, 900 million pupils who cannot wash their hands while at school. So it is right to review Scotland's international development strategy in light of the global pandemic. But it would be wrong for ministers and civil servants to carry out such an important review in any way in-house, without full public consultation, including formal input from all those hundreds of civil society organisations in Scotland and in other countries which play such an important part in delivering Scotland's international development agenda. The existing strategy, as the Minister will know, has commanded cross-party support under successive ministers in successive governments. So before contemplating any reduction in small grants or in core funding of NGOs or in development education, I would encourage the Minister and her colleagues to reflect on the origins and purpose of Scotland's international development strategy in considering how to adapt it to the era of COVID-19. The origins of both the International Development Fund and the formal partnership between Scotland's devolved government and the government of Malawi go back, as the Minister said, to 2005. They were conceived not as competing with or replacing the much larger levels of development assistance provided by the Department for International Development on behalf of the whole UK. They were conceived as adding value on the basis of Scotland's established strengths. And the most important of these strengths was not the work of government then or since, of any party in any parliament. It was the network of mutually supportive connections between civil society in Scotland and civil society in developing countries, starting with Malawi. Thousands of Scottish people in hundreds of communities, in churches and NGOs have worked in partnership with counterparts in developing countries for years, not only in the partner countries that have been mentioned, but other countries too. And they've done that long before, they did that long before devolution, and they've continued to do it and to work together in a wide variety of different ways. Scottish civil society has matched support for development projects in the Global South with support for development education at home, promoting global citizenship, not just for countries or institutions, but for individuals and communities as well. Many of those civil society individuals and organisations are members of this Parliament's cross-party group on international development, which I convene, as well as of other cross-party groups which have been mentioned by members across the chamber. I know many of those members of that group would be deeply concerned about any shift away from Scottish Government support delivered to partner countries through Scottish NGOs. That support helps those organisations and individuals to work in the world's poorest countries, to develop projects which go direct to those who need them most, where even now many are taking forward projects to respond to the impact of COVID-19. And I hope and look forward to the possibility that the Minister will be able to attend our cross-party group as well, in order that they can hear directly from her about how she conceives the review going forward. But it's important to say then that Scotland's devolved government 16 years ago did not conjure an international development programme out of thin air. What it did was bring together what was already there, the different areas of activity of Scottish civil society, the different strands of government funding of development NGOs and development education centres, and gave to them the structure and support which government was best placed to provide. And that was all happening very significantly, just as our reinvigorated DFID was taking development assistance to a new level on behalf of the UK as a whole, and doing so, as indeed you know, Presiding Officer, from our base here in Scotland. That allowed Scottish voices to inform thinking about how to ensure development aid went to the poorest people in the most disadvantaged places, giving greater weight to relationships between civil society here and civil society in those countries than to formal links between national governments. Those formal links are important, but if we really want to reach the poorest people, it is the networks of civil society connections that really can help us to deliver that. So to review where COVID leaves us, to consider how to deploy additional resources, all of that is good and would be welcome. But to abandon or downgrade the use of civil society as the best route for development assistance would be a grave error, and to reduce the support for the promotion of global citizenship among people here in Scotland would also be a mistake. Doing those things would weaken Scotland's reputation where it has always been strongest. Even more importantly, it would risk closing the lines of communication which best serve the world's poorest people at a time when they need us to hear their voices more than ever. Thank you.
Alistair Allen, please, to be followed by Edward Mountain.
Presiding Officer, I welcome the opportunity to discuss international development in Parliament today, and I declare an interest as office bearer of the cross-party groups on both Malawi and international development. The Government's present review comes at a moment when the Scottish Government, like everyone else of goodwill, is looking at how best to work towards a better world post-pandemic, a world that is fairer than the one that went before, a world that is more resilient to the diseases that hit the world's poorest hardest, and which recognises the threat which environmental degradation presents both to our long-term and immediate human health. One of the greatest privileges I ever had was during my own stint as International Development Minister, when I had the chance briefly to see the work which the Scottish Government was doing during brief visits that I made to both Malawi and Zambia. It was clear to me then that the warmth of Scotland's relationship with both of those countries makes for a unique kind of partnership. Friendliness and respect are characteristics of Scotland's relationship with all the countries that we work in, and I'm sure others will mention both Zambia, but also Rwanda and Pakistan. However, my time is short today, and so I want to say a little more about one country in particular, and that is Malawi. Nobody who's been to Malawi can have failed to miss the continuing affection for Scotland that exists there, notwithstanding, as the Minister rightly pointed out, Scotland's far from blameless role in the British Empire. But that affection is evidenced in many ways, not least in the fact that when an independent Malawi quite rightly decolonised its place names, it left one European name on its map, Blantyre, out of the regard it had for David Livingstone. And in Scotland, meanwhile, statistics suggest that an amazing 45% of Scots may personally know someone who is directly involved in Scotland's work in or for Malawi, often through partner agencies such as FIA or Mary's Meals, who have transformed the lives of hundreds of thousands of children by ensuring that they have the cup of porridge in school that often makes the difference between them being able to attend school or not. So I want to make a particular case today for the work which the Scotland-Malawi Partnership and its sister body in Malawi, the Malawi-Scotland Partnership, continue to make in promoting a dignified, two-way partnership. And that kind of partnership does not, as others have pointed out, simply mean one-way charity with benevolent donors on one side and grateful recipients on the other. It means recognising that Malawians have a great deal to teach Scotland. The partnership has been outspoken, passionate and provocative, challenging both government and the international development sector when required for the last 15 years. And so, Presiding Officer, I believe it is a model that we cherish, and I hope it is one that we will see flourish in the future with continuing Scottish Government support as we seek to build further on these already very strong foundations. Presiding Officer, the relationship between Malawi and Scotland was emphasised only last weekend when the President of Malawi, Lazarus Chakwera, addressed the annual general meeting of the Scotland-Malawi Partnership. And that relationship is one which I hope and believe we will continue to place at the front and centre of the work which Scotland does in the world.
The last contribution in the open debate is Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. You ignored the request for 10 minutes, so I'm assuming I'm not getting it.
You can have a generous 4.
Sorry, Presiding Officer.
A generous 4 minutes.
Oh, a generous 4 minutes. Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is an important debate we're having here today, and I'm thankful that we are. The world is a constantly changing place. Perhaps the changes we face today should focus our actions on finding more speedy resolutions. It's therefore quite right for us to review how Scotland contributes to international development. New global challenges are constantly emerging, and the spread of COVID-19 not only threatens public health, but the destruction of many economies across the world. Developing countries with their fragile economies and fragile healthcare systems are without doubt at most threat from this pandemic. We cannot also ignore the increased threat of climate change and environmental degradation. Whether it be famines or floods, extreme weather is definitely playing havoc with our harvest, food production and livelihoods. These can also hold back a country's economic development. If these global challenges weren't enough to deal with, there's still the problems of disease, extreme poverty and destruction caused by armed conflicts across the world. Now, it would be impossible for Scotland to solve every one of these global challenges on our own. but we certainly have a big role to play. And I'm proud that as part of the United Kingdom, we are a pioneer when it comes to global aid. Since 2013, the UK has indeed spent 0.7% of its gross national income on international development, and we will continue to do so. Why? Because there's a legal commitment to do just that, and I agree with that. And the UK is also answering the global challenge of COVID-19 by pledging an additional £774 million in aid. That's a commitment we can all surely welcome. While Scotland's contribution to international aid is smaller, it is no less important to our partner countries such as Malawi, Rwanda, Zambia and Pakistan. As many have recognised in this debate this afternoon already, the partnership between Scotland and Malawi is unique and worthy of particular praise. The success of this partnership is rooted in historic and civil connections between the two countries, making progress more enriching and empowering for both. And this can be typified by this simple statistic that has already been mentioned by Liam MacArthur. For every £1 invested by Scottish Government, an additional £200 comes from Scotland's civic society. That adds up to £49 million in support from individuals and local communities across Scotland. And there are many success stories of the Scotland-Malawi partnership, and many involve the Highlands and Islands too. I'm pleased to see that schools such as Culloden Academy, Granson Grammar, Inverness Royal Academy, Milburn Academy and Lochardale Primary School have all developed links with Malawian schools. These school links help to build the next generation of global citizens, and this will further deepen the Scotland-Malawi partnership. And I'd like to pay special tribute, if I may, to Andrew Walker, retired Police Chief Inspector from the Northern Constabulary, who has supported the development of a victim support unit by the Malawi Police Service. This unit offers refuge, support, guidance, counselling to all those who appear at the facility. It is really, really important. Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government must always remember, as we must all do, the lessons of the Scotland-Malawi partnership and continue to invest in this approach, which serves both countries so well. If this review strengthens what already works, then Scotland will continue to be a pioneer in international development. And as part of the United Kingdom, we can make a huge difference, a difference that we can all, frankly, be very proud of. Thank you.
We now move to the closing speeches, and Colin Smith, please, for around 4 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Every contributor in this debate has highlighted the undeniable fact that COVID-19 has affected every aspect of our lives. As the Minister said in her opening comments, however, it has changed the world. The underlying structural inequalities that existed long before COVID-19 have not gone away, but the pandemic has brought new challenges, and that is reflected in both the Scottish Government's motion and Labour's amendment. As Scotland's International Development Alliance said in their briefing for this debate, COVID has led to a drastic setback to progress on global sustainable development. Tier Fund Scotland noted in their briefing, the pandemic has not only made those in poverty more vulnerable and pushed them further into poverty, but has caused others to slide into poverty that were not at risk before. So it is more important than ever that we have an effective approach to international development, and Labour therefore is happy to support the Scottish Government's review. However, as Claire Baker and Lewis MacDonald both made clear, this appears to be more than a simple refresh of the existing strategy. It is therefore critical that this process is informed by robust and thorough consultation with partner country governments and civil society, both here in Scotland and abroad. But there is genuine concern over the scope of the current consultation proposals. Scotland's International Development Alliance noted in the briefing, the discussion events already announced will not allow the full breadth of civil society in Scotland nor in partner countries to engage with this review. Tier Fund Scotland pointed out in a quote, there is no mention of consulting civil society in focus countries in the proposed review. And the Scotland-Malawi partnership also highlighted the need for a transparent, engaging and accountable approach to the review. Engaging with communities and civil society within the focus countries and here in Scotland therefore must be part of our approach to international development. So that's why Labour's amendment makes clear there should be meaningful consultation with stakeholders. As convener of the cross-party group on fair trade and chair of Dumfries and Galloway Fair Trade Steering Group, I see on a daily basis the invaluable work of many of those stakeholders in promoting an important aspect of our contribution to international development, that of fair trade. So I want to pay tribute to those who made Scotland a fair trade nation, the businesses, the Scottish Fair Trade Forum for their leadership and coordination, the volunteers across Scotland working tirelessly on a daily basis in their local fair trade groups. And with your indulgence, Presiding Officer, I want to pay particular tribute to one such volunteer, the late Judith Milne, who sadly passed away in April. Judith was a real champion for fair trade, whether it was running the Dumfries Fair Trade stall at the Dunsker Big Brew, or when she turned up at my advice surgery to bend my ear that not all the chocolate in the Scottish Parliament shop was fair trade chocolate. She never missed an opportunity, and her extraordinary determination to fair trade from the very beginning of fair trade, often going above and beyond to promote the whole principle of fair trade, led to her receiving the Volunteer of the Year award from the Scottish Fair Trade Forum in 2018. Now, earlier this year, the Scottish Government reported back on their review of fair trade, and this work provides insights that I'm sure will help to inform the wider review of international development. Because fair trade embodies so many of the principles that should be underpinning our approach to international development. Just over 2 years ago, I hosted an event here in Parliament marking the launch of the International Fair Trade Charter. This charter sets out the principles of fair trade, decent work, inclusive economic growth, gender equity, food security, sustainable livelihoods, ecological balance, thriving communities and people-first trade policies. All of these aims align closely with wider social development goals. That should be at the very heart of the Government's vision for international development. Supporting fair trade is a proven way to advance these key aims and to respond to economic, social and environmental challenges globally. Many organisations have highlighted the need for our approach to international development to first and foremost empower communities in partner countries, amplifying their voices and supporting their needs. Fair trade as a producer-led partnership fits very much with this vision. This movement has been led by the voice of producers as they set out the challenges they face and the opportunities they seek to take and shape the agenda for trade justice internationally. It is their leadership in partnership with others that has led to the growth and the reach and impact of fair trade. But, Presiding Officer, the basic principles of fair trade, better prices, decent working conditions, local sustainability and fair terms of trade for farmers and workers in developing countries, indeed across the world, have never been more important than they are now, and they must be central to our approach to international development. Thank you.
Peter Chapman, please, for around 5 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the chance to close this debate on behalf of my Conservative colleagues. This has been a consensual debate and has support across the Chamber. That is only right and what we should expect. The Scottish Conservatives recognise the great importance of Scotland being a good global citizen and continually striving to become a better one. The work that the International Development Fund has achieved has been notable, especially in its contributions to the Climate Justice Fund and its response to humanitarian crises around the world, but in particular, of course, in Malawi, Zambia, Rwanda and Pakistan. COVID-19 presents a new and dangerous threat to the world, and we know is likely to persist some considerable time. It is therefore imperative that the goals of the International Development Programme are reviewed in order to meet the challenges posed by this virus. This review also presents an opportunity for the Scottish Government to ensure that the programme is delivering on its aims pre-COVID-19, and if not, why not? And how to continue to achieve these objectives in the new reality that we all now face. The Scottish Conservatives agree that needs-led development is important. Partner countries are best placed to recognise their own needs and lead their own development. However, there is a need to ensure that the projects funded are scrutinised regularly in order to ensure that these projects are having the impact expected and not, as in some cases with international aid, doing more harm than good. And this will also ensure that funding is going to the right projects. The funding of programmes that support partner country-led development should ensure that the rest of the draft principles posed align. The need to recognise the white gaze in international development is important, and listening to local voices with a needs-led focus should ensure that a diverse range of opinions are heard. I should say at this point, Presiding Officer, that the term white gaze was a new one to me, but I now know and understand what it means and agree that it is a powerful phrase. Presiding Officer, COVID-19 has shown us, all of us, the need for diverse and innovative forms of technology. This should rightly be utilised to forward the goals of the International Development Fund and promote health and well-being on an international scale. And just, Presiding Officer, in the last couple of minutes that I have, I would just like to reflect on some of what we have heard today during this debate. And I would just say that Alexander Stewart celebrated the fact that Scotland has two governments and that both must be celebrated in the way they support international development. We should recognise that the UK is probably the only country to consistently spend 0.7% of GDP on international development, and that should be celebrated. And as other speakers have said, both Claire Baker and Liam MacArthur, I also listened to the speech of the Malawi President Lazarus Chakwera the other day and was impressed by what he had to say about how partnership working is a huge success in his country. And he told us that 300,000 people in Malawi are now involved, but his aim is to reach 500,000 within the next 3 years. Now, Liam MacArthur also highlighted the fact that each pound spent in Scotland or spent in international aid in Scotland, it levers in another £200, so that the £10 million fund is worth so much more. And I thought Ruth Maguire made an excellent speech, a thought-provoking, to the point, and a very moving speech as well, and I congratulate her on that. Alistair Allen reminded us that international aid is a two-way process, and that Scotland can learn from Malawi, just as Malawi can learn from us. So, Presiding Officer, in conclusion, the Scottish Conservatives agree that in the light of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is important to re-evaluate the goals of the IDF in order to ensure it can best tackle the new challenges the world faces in conjunction with pre-COVID aims and objectives. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Now call Jenny Goruth to wind up the debate. If you could take us up to just before 4:30 decision time, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to thank all members this afternoon who've contributed, and to my officials and all of the organisations who have provided briefings ahead of today's debate. I mean, Claire Baker at the start of the debate made reference to the fact that these organisations are working through the pandemic at this moment in time. So thank you to all of them for their efforts. In opening this afternoon's debate, I highlighted this Parliament's traditionally strong cross-party support for international development, and I think that has been evident again today. I also spoke about our ongoing commitment to partnership and collaborative working, and that was really a key theme which ran throughout this afternoon's debate. It was good to hear Alexander Stewart welcome the £2 million the Scottish Government has ring-fenced in the fight against COVID in our partner countries, but also we heard from Lewis MacDonald about the historical links between the Scottish Government going back to the time of the Executive in terms of international development. Alistair Allen very passionately spoke about his own experiences of working in Malawi. Now, unfortunately, Presiding Officer, I have yet to visit Malawi. It is on my list, I am sure, as and when we are allowed to travel again. The purpose of this review is to refresh our international development offer. I'm fully cognizant of the real strengths in our unique approach in Scotland, and indeed I've spent much of my time over the summer months meeting with our partners in country, virtually of course, and hearing about some of the really powerful impacts of our work. But what COVID-19 has necessitated is a refocusing of our purpose. And of course, there are global events as well that make this review inevitable. I spoke today about the Black Lives Matter movement as a powerful example. Only 3% of UK charity chief executives are from the Black, Asian or minority ethnic community. Black Lives Matter is a global movement which grew up on the streets of America, but it has an undeniable relevance in Scotland. We can translate that global movement for our context, and we should translate what it means to the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community, given the persistent underrepresentation in the charitable sector across the UK and in Scotland. And on that point, I'm delighted that Peter Chapman now knows what white gaze means. But we should also take cognizance of how COVID-19 has changed the challenges that have always existed in terms of international development. You know, gender inequality, for example, has arguably become much more prescient as a result of the pandemic. Edward Mountain mentioned famine and disease. Ruth Maguire spoke powerfully about the field of conflict and about the work of the human rights defenders. That's work that the Scottish Government, of course, supports. But, Presiding Officer, we do not exist in Scotland in international development in a policy vacuum. And I take on board Lewis MacDonald's points when he spoke about the original purpose of what international development in Scotland was meant to be about in terms of complementing the work of the UK Government. But of course, the UK Government's decision to merge the Foreign and Commonwealth Office with the Department for International Development will impact on the international development sector in Scotland. Liam MacArthur mentioned it in his contribution. So it is deeply regrettable that that merger happened with no consultation with the sector, which I think is in stark contrast to what I'm trying to do with our consultation that's already underway in Scotland. Yes, I will.
Lewis MacDonald.
I agree with him that the decision to merge DFID with the Foreign Commonwealth Office does cause a good deal of anxiety among those involved in the international development field. Does it not make it all the more important that Scotland continues to deliver on the things which are distinctive about the Scottish offer, and that includes, above all, the work that we do through civil society in partner countries?
Jenny Colruth.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Lewis MacDonald for that intervention. He's absolutely right to say that. We have a unique contribution to make. But it's not just about civil society in Scotland. It's also about the needs of our partner countries. So we have to listen to all the voices in this review. It's not just about one part of the sector dictating to government, as it were. I'm really keen to listen today, and I think we've had a great debate, but we need to be cognizant that this isn't just about one individual part of the sector. And just in terms of consultation, that was obviously a key theme which ran through the debate today. Liam MacArthur, Claire Baker and Lewis MacDonald himself made salient points on that. And I've already had some really useful discussions with the sector, but in terms of the principles, these are draft principles, so I'm keen to hear members' thoughts on them, but also some of the organisations who have already contributed their thoughts through briefings today. Claire Baker's concerns in terms of the timeframes, I'm going to think about that and I'm going to take that away from the debate today. But I want to be open with Parliament, which is why I brought this debate forward today. Liam MacArthur said we shouldn't change for change's sake. And, you know, he's absolutely correct. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. There are lots of powerful and good examples of the work that we do through international development in Scotland. But it is about future-proofing our programme as we move forward so that it is fit for purpose in terms of the backdrop of COVID-19. I'm also keen to balance the views of the sector in Scotland with those of our partner countries, as I mentioned in my response to Lewis MacDonald. I will work with members on this, and it would be my intention to return to the Chamber, given the opportunity, following the review's conclusion, to allow us once again to reach a consensus on how we can move forward. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll begin a series of roundtables next week with our partners in Malawi to get that vital input from civic society, which has been a consistent theme in today's debate. And as I mentioned later this month as well, I will host a series of roundtables with the sector in Scotland, which I know is in reference specifically to Colin Smith's points. Presiding Officer, earlier I spoke of our ongoing commitment to our current international development partner countries, to Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda in Africa, where we have our development programmes, and of course to Pakistan, where we have championed girls' and women's access to education through a scholarships programme. It's because of that commitment to our partner countries that I wanted to conduct this review, to ensure we continue to make the greatest contribution we can in our partner countries against that shared challenge of COVID-19. Claire Baker mentioned policy coherence for sustainable development, and of course PCSD isn't just for international development, it cuts across all portfolio areas in government. But I do want to reassure members that this review will consider how we deliver on our policy commitment to policy coherence. That is how we ensure we do no harm through our wider government policies. Presiding Officer, moving on, we know that smaller countries can achieve some of the greatest development impact overall, even with a small budget. In that regard, I'm looking forward to meeting with a number of European development ministers to discuss their development policies, to learn from others on best global practice to benefit our own relationships with our partner countries. Last week, as the world reached an ominous milestone, the loss of 1 million lives from the COVID-19 pandemic, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, calling on all nations, said, "As we remember so many lives lost, let us never forget that our future rests on solidarity as people united and as United Nations." And so we commit through our draft principles for this review and our future programme to international solidarity, a solidarity that I think is embraced and embedded in this Parliament too. Similarly, speaking a few weeks ago at the UNGA in New York, Mr Guterres characterised the pandemic as not only a wake-up call, but a dress rehearsal for challenges to come. He went on to say that the pandemic has taught us our choices matter. As we look to the future, let us make sure we choose wisely. It is for this reason, Presiding Officer, that we must embrace this wake-up call and make the right and wise choices for the future of Scotland's international development programme. We do so whilst always maintaining an approach that is in tune with our values: compassion, solidarity, internationalism. Presiding Officer.
That concludes the debate on COVID-19, review of Scottish Government's approach to international development. We'll move on to the next item of business, which is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau Motion 22960 on committee membership changes. And I would ask Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question on this motion will be put at decision time, to which we now come. And there are 4 questions to be put as a result of today's business. The first question is that Amendment 22949.1 in the name of Alexander Stewart, which seeks to amend Motion 22949 in the name of Jenny Gilruth on COVID-19, review of Scottish Government's approach to international development, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Good. Hold on till I get to the next page. The amendment is therefore agreed. The next question is that Amendment 22949.2 in the name of Claire Baker, which seeks to amend Motion 22949 in the name of Jenny Gilruth on COVID-19, review of Scottish Government's approach to international development, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The amendment is therefore agreed. The third question is that Motion 22949 in the name of Jenny Gilruth, as amended, on COVID-19, review of Scottish Government's approach to international development, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. And the final question is that Motion 22960 in the name of Graham Day on committee membership changes be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed, and that concludes decision time. Please take care on leaving the chamber. Remember to maintain social distancing and be careful. And we will now move on to members' business. So those leaving, please do so quietly.